All right. Hey, everybody, this is Ryan Boyles, back with you again for yet another IBM Insight video chat show. This week, we're going to talk a bit about security and a safer planet. But first, I wanted to mention that we have the replay of last week's episode concerning Internet of Things available. You can go check it out and watch Zach Jory from the social media newsroom team talk with Ted Conroy and I all about Internet of Things and topics that are really on the forefront of adoption, of monetization, of standards and security related to Internet of Things providers, service builders, and application developers. I also wanted to mention that you can check out a fresh Internet of Things blog post over on the Big Data Hub, where there's a bit of a preview for a webinar that's coming up with an analyst from Gartner that's going to talk about doing digital business with Internet of Things. So I encourage you to check that out, and we'll put the link down in the show notes. With that, I want to introduce our guests for the week. We have Andrew Borne joining us to talk a bit about, I think, a hot topic for a lot of folks in the public sector space and the governance space. So Andrew, hello and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So Andrew, I know we can find you on Twitter. Your name is your Twitter handle at Andrew Borne, and it looks like you're talking a bit on your Twitter channel. I noticed about Truman and other things like that. So I would love to hear more about your day-to-day job and what you do at IBM.
Sure. Yeah, in my day job at IBM, I'm the federal manager for U.S. government federal agencies and large federal systems integrators for I2 Safer Planet solutions. So that includes our I2 intelligence analysis and big data analysis tools, in addition to a suite of products we call Smarter Cities that bases a big data dashboards with Intelligent Operations Center and other defense and intelligence tools.
Awesome.
And and some of the other things I do is I'm engaged with a think tank here in Washington, D.C. called the Truman Center for National Policy, which is focused on U.S. national security and global leadership.
That's very interesting. I love to see, I guess, where I really get excited is seeing the intersection of technology with policy and with government. So it's definitely, for me, a very interesting topic. And I would encourage everyone to take a look at what you're doing. Also, you can find out more about the Truman Center by going to @Truman Center on Twitter as well. So with that, I wanted to just sort of, get right into the heart of this matter, this subject today. I would encourage everyone that's watching, you can find out more information about this by following along on the Safer Planet hashtag that IBM introduced last week. We also held a Twitter chat last week where we talked a bit about cyber security, fraud. We touched on, the application of our solutions in this space. But I wanted to hear, directly from someone looking at how our solutions are being used out in the field in a very important industry. So Andrew, I would love to hear more about sort of what are the biggest concerns right now that analytics can help address in this space.
Sure, absolutely. Within government space at large, obviously security and cybersecurity are huge. Counterterrorism missions are not going away. Intelligence and investigations for law enforcement. We're seeing dramatic rises in the volume of cybercrime committed by organized crime and in some cases by other nations. So really, I guess all of that comes together to create a high demand for tools that can get the signal out of the noise. Tools that empower an analyst in any discipline. Obviously the intelligence community is one space where a lot of these tools saw some of their genesis in the past 10 years. But looking forward, big data analytics for investigations to empower proactive defenses, again, against cyber threats, against terrorist threats, against criminal threats, people trying to exploit or extort or commit fraud using fraudulent digital identification. These are all the types of investigations where I2 tools are leading the way. And more than, well, hundreds of thousands of users around the world have already been using these tools. And as we look forward, we're going to see a next generation in the way that security operations are led and conducted through security operations centers on the cyber side, and frankly, in the way that police departments, militaries, and other security services have to coordinate their activity amongst themselves and with the private sector.
Yeah, and you know, this is something that when you look at the news, like when you're following closely sort of what's happening in the just on the internet at large, we've seen lots of cases of breaches in the consumer space. Of course, those make big headlines when it affects somebody's wallet or potentially their identity. What can you really say about this space when you sort of shift the lens and look at cyber attacks with government breaches? I mean, there seems to be new headlines even this month talking about this issue and sort of what does it mean, both as a citizen of a country, or as a business whose job it is to help the government with these issues.
Absolutely. Most recently we've been reading about the U.S. Office of Personnel Management having a very large number, millions of records stolen with detailed information on people that had investigations for government employment. So obviously, if that information is compromised or breached, the cat's out of the bag. And I think historically, the way that people have looked at some of these cybersecurity solutions is that they're going to happen, and it's about resilience and how quickly you can recover. But I think what we're encouraging people to look at with our tools is a more proactive mindset. In a fight, it's not about, you don't want to be the guy that takes a punch the best. It's much better to be the person who can see it coming and avoid it. And the way that you're going to do that is to determine the human-to-human factors, not just the ones and zeros, not just what type of malware is coming, but somebody is creating that malware. Somebody is generating an insider threat from within an organization to steal data. And in those types of situations, it's absolutely critical that the organizations and the governments have the ability to leverage all of the data at their disposal. So, I keep coming back to this point, but one of the talking points I've heard a lot and I like is the data is actually a new found natural resource that is ever increasing, not diminishing. Right. And because of that, the people that will be the winners, the people that will stay ahead and have an edge, not just in cyberspace, but in economic competitiveness, maintaining secrecy, maintaining government secrecy, ability to investigate threats in the private sector or the government space, ability to reduce the amount of waste, fraud, and abuse that can happen within any large enterprise. Those people are the ones, not just who have the data, but can take that massive set, petabytes of information, and within it find the connections, or have the connections suggested to them through machine learning, cognitive computing, a lot of these things that IBM has invested billions of dollars in the last several years.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely, to me, I mean, just thinking back at our conference last year at Insight 2014, I mean, one of the most compelling stories for me was, I believe when Jeff Jonas got up on stage and talked about how they were using predictive analytics to help with, safeguarding or, finding fraudulent, shipping vessels in the Malaysian sort of theater, right? And that's become, that's just one example of where modern day piracy needs to be fought, from a technology point of view, to just ensure that commerce takes place. And so governments and the military and business side are all coming together to try to address that issue. I wanted to talk to you more about a case study that you brought to us to go into today. It's very interesting. It's described as a way for the IBM i2 technologies to help analysts to really look at data rapidly and then brief their field operatives for the next stage of engagement. So it's not just reactionary. It is, like you said, preparing these analysts to do their job better, to sort of, you know, address threats that they can sort of not just mitigate damage, but I guess look forward and try to detect patterns. So what can you tell us about Operation Nighthawk?
Sure. Operation Nighthawk is a publicly released case study on an international special operations forces training exercise that took place using I2 tools in order to empower the intelligence analysts to drive operations. And if you think about the work that special operations forces do, especially when you talk about an exercise in this case which involved more than 1,600 individuals from a variety of nations' military and police forces. So you have a disparate number of organizations. You have 6 special operations groups working within that number to target terrorist leaders and insurgent cells, look for piracy in the area where they were operating, and have extreme data volume. And when we talk about that level of extreme data volume and a limited number of analysts to guide those police and soldiers and special operators in the field, I think it's a really good case example when it's successful of how any organization can leverage big data to drive highly impactful decisions, right? These are decisions about the security and safety of a civilian populace and targeting one terrorist leader or one insurgent leader amongst a crowd of millions of people. And in order to do that with the amount of what we call digital exhaust at times, it's nearly invisible, and its sheer scope and its ability to blend with other data at that petabytes upon petabyte scale that I was talking about makes it very important that there are suggestive analytics, or some of the things that you talked about, Jeff Jonas has talked about in the past and continues to talk about, where a machine can suggest connections and links that an individual human or even a team of humans would miss. So really what we're talking about is using and empowering smart machines and machine learning to take cycles for intelligence analysis that used to take days or many hours at a minimum and reduce those to seconds. And when we do that, it makes it much more likely that those teams will identify the exact location of a terrorist leader, identify the exact members of an insurgent cell, and leverage all of the data from all kinds of sources. If you think about it, it can be captured documents that might be scanned or typed into a system in one case. It might be information about telephone calls on another. It might be information about what credit cards were used at what point. And so with all these disparate data streams, it's very, very important that you have an open platform, easy to use, easy to adopt by multiple parties with various levels of training. And I think the big success of Operation Nighthawk was that it proved that the open standards and open architecture that we endorse here at IBM really allowed for maximum speed in the information to decision to action pipeline that has to drive special operations. So the lesson I take from that is if it works for special operations in that type of security environment, it will certainly also work for cyber threats, where we need to identify who the actors are trying to steal the information and disrupt them before they've taken it. We need to identify insider threats within a large organization. Obviously, many people are familiar with the case of Edward Snowden and the disclosure of thousands and thousands of documents at great cost to the United States government. Mm-hmm. If someone had been pulling together the right forms of data, if machine learning had been suggesting in real time a constant monitoring process on people with access to that data, it's entirely possible that we may have had a different situation and that may have been disrupted. But without looking backward, looking forward, the key is to take the best in human intelligence, the best in human decision making, and empower it with simple, easy to use, open platform, big data analytics solutions. And that's what we do at I2 Safer Planet to make the planet safer and secure commerce as well.
Excellent. This is utterly fascinating to me, but I know we have limited time to talk today on our video chat, but I want to sort of just ask, where do you think we're going from here? We've been, IBM has been, really making huge strides with projects like you mentioned, like this case study with Operation Nighthawk, with like the case study that we mentioned from last year's conference. But where do you see things going in the next 6 months to a year, or even out further. I mean, with this Safer Planet portfolio that we now have with these sophisticated solutions that really, like you said, allow us to aggregate and analyze massive amounts of data quickly. Where do you think this can be applied? And where do you see as the hottest areas that government agencies really need to pay attention to right now?
Well, obviously, on the expense side of the ledger for any government agency, places where there are entitlement payments, places where there are high volume procurements happening, any place where there's a propensity for fraud, which again is a human activity, that's not a machine activity, but we can leverage machine learning and leverage cognitive computing and leverage the link analysis tools implicit in I2 and really use that as a cockpit for a number of other IBM solutions to empower fast decision making and disrupt waste, fraud, and abuse before it happens. So I think that's probably the financial levers will drive a lot of early adoption. Historically, obviously, I mentioned counterterrorism, insider threat security type investigations have been using this for some time. But I think the other spot in the next 6 months where we're going to see a dramatic interest in these types of solutions is going to be in the cybersecurity intelligence front. And by that, I mean taking the work that traditionally has been done by intelligence analysts. They use an intelligence cycle between planning what they're going to look for, collecting the data, refining the data, creating a product that helps drive a decision, and then disseminating that information. When we talked about Operation Nighthawk, that's related to the intelligence cycle and conventional path on a counterterrorism or security mission. But that type of work is going to have a direct overlay into cyberspace. When we talk about who is doing the hacking, who is targeting the banks, who is targeting any other entitlement provider, whether it's the Veterans Administration or Center for Medicare, any of these large government payment programs where fraud is likely, we need to overlay the intelligence discipline with the cyber discipline and put it in a single cockpit. That's what the I2 Enterprise Insight Analysis tools provides. It's going to empower the traditional cyber analyst who's been an I2 professional and information technology expert to apply the same tools that intelligence analyst applies and create kind of a merged discipline as we see these threats emerging in cyberspace. And I think the dramatic headlines that we've seen about Sony, about Home Depot, about Target, on the government side, office personnel management, these are the types of cases that are going to drive early adoption at the executive level. It's going to take this out of the information technology and traditionally what people have thought of as cybersecurity and merge that with an intelligence analysis discipline in order to uncover threats and determine why the people are trying to take the information in the first place or destroy the system. And that, I think, is where we truly empower enhanced security and Safer Planet solutions.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's a really good point that you're making, that really the intelligence side of the question or the problem, where even with this breach that we're talking about with our government, even knowing or guessing who did it isn't really enough. Now we need to know their motivation. Why did they want those records, those types of records for those employees? To what end are they using it directly? Or are they redistributing it to someone else? So it's really fascinating. And I want to sort of shift gears for a moment and ask you more about, give us an idea about who would you like to see attend Insight, attend the conference to really learn more about these solutions, because I really want folks watching to understand the roles of folks that would attend a conference like this and really find out more about the I2 solution set.
Absolutely. Traditional Insight attendees in the information technology space, of course, will benefit from learning how these tools and solutions are moving into their realm. I think other people at Insight, anyone in a decision-making or a knowledge worker type role at this point is going to need to have an understanding of these types of tools. And frankly, I would encourage people, some of whom may have thought of themselves in the cybersecurity realm, specifically related again to identification of malware and digital forensics, right? To open their mind to leveraging these other big data solutions to determine again who are the humans or who are the organizations doing the attacking. and open it up. So it's really more of a front office conversation from any organization, whether that's a government agency or office or someone in the private sector. So, I think this is the space we live in. Our lives are inextricably linked. You had Internet of Things last week, but all of our daily lives are increasingly dependent upon mobile, cloud, Internet of Things technologies, and all of that activity creates a lot of data. So we need to learn how to leverage the data and really ride the storm for the benefit of our organizations.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you're right. One of the hottest things, one of the big things we talked about on the previous show was that we had this massive meetup here in Raleigh, standing room only at a meetup for 350 people at NC State University, talking about the issues related to Internet of Things and beyond just adoption and monetization, which is people scratching their head trying to figure out what's next. The real issues for today's implementation are security and standards, and how are we going to take these massive volumes of data, not only secure them, but how are they going to interoperate with each other? How is your Fitbit device going to interact with your insurance carrier or with your employee systems or what have you? So it is all related, and I think that's the great thing about Insight is it's such a good opportunity to see all these things in one place. It's a giant, big data opportunity for everybody.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Andrew, for being on the show this week. Do you have any parting thoughts before we go? I wanted to give you one last chance to, really, I guess, tell us, what should be keeping people up at night when it comes to these things.
I think what used to keep people up at night, particularly amongst the IBM customer base, would have been that they were drowning in the data and drowning in the systems that were alerting them to what was happening in the data. What we're doing with the Safer Planet portfolio and I2 Enterprise Insight Analysis is to take that enterprise data and put in a central cockpit, so where you can get the information, you can react, you can leverage the data in real time. We're talking about seconds for the types of decision process that would have taken days or hours just a few months ago, and it's now been productized and moved out. So this is the time to learn how to leverage big data to optimize security and intelligence operations for all types of organizations. And we can learn more and talk more about it at Insight. Look forward to it.
Oh yeah, looking forward to it. So yes, so I just wanted to reiterate to everyone, I'm Ryan Boyles. You can follow me, of course, at the Rab on Twitter. You can follow Andrew at Andrew Borne. And of course, you can stay plugged into all of the hot topics related to the Insight conference with the IBM Insight hashtag, and the Safer Planet hashtag is related to everything that we've been talking about today around big data, advanced analytics, and the security and intelligence that these I2 solutions provide. So we will include lots of show notes down in the description of today's replay. Encourage you to reach out, send your questions to Andrew or myself, and we really do hope that, of course, you will attend Insight. There is an opportunity to save $700 off your conference registration right now if you register this month, and so we wanted to make that discount available and known to everyone. And with that, thank you again, Andrew, and we're going to sign off for this week's chat.